What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So during that Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft FTC case that was ongoing, we had some information get out there around Nintendo's next generation device with Bobby Kotick, who actually testified about it, and now we're starting to see some files made public from that case that gives us a bit more information around the timetable and even the code name for the next system. We'll take a look at all of that though here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Starfield as we had some more sales data that was published that shows just how big of a release this has been for Microsoft. And for those of you who have been asking about Dragon Quest III HD 2D and Dragon Quest XII, we have a bit of an update. Kind of. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're gonna start today with Spider-Man 2. We just had all those previews go live at the end of last week, and there's been more and more information kind of trickling out. One bit of information talks about some of the graphical modes we'll be able to use depending on if we want higher frame rate or better visuals. But we can see this posted up, this over on Twitter from James, who is the community and marketing at Insomniac Games. Says there's 30 FPS, 40 FPS, and 60 FPS, all with ray tracing. So we do know Insomniac utilized the 40 FPS mode with Ratchet and Clank, which worked out really well for like the 120 Hertz VRR enabled displays. Some people look at that and say that was the best mode to use, kind of that medium when it comes to frame rate versus visuals and stuff. Although I still prefer the higher frame rate, especially in a game like Spider-Man where you're going to be swinging around all over the place, a lot of fast camera movements and stuff. I'd rather have the better responsiveness of that frame rate. But I also like that Insomniac is giving the options, but even able to add in ray tracing across the board. I think this is only a good thing, obviously, for the options, but especially going into something like the Spider-Man 2 release and then eventually Wolverine. It just shows that Insomniac continues to get better and better with the PlayStation 5 hardware, and some exciting stuff. Although I am curious what most people will pick, and that's actually why I made it the poll question. We'll look at that later on in the show. Also, while Bungie did unveil Marathon during the PlayStation experience, we also know they're working on a brand new intellectual property, and it seems like we're getting some more bits of information around it, which we can see this posted up. This over on the Game Post says multiple sources familiar with Project Gummy Bears. That's the code name for it right now. Development plans suggest that Bungie is using the Unreal Engine for this new title, with one source specifically mentioning the latest Unreal Engine 5. What's interesting though about Project Gummy Bears, yes, it is a live service game, which is kind of what we expect from Bungie, and to be honest, a lot of these larger AAA initiatives, we'll say, it is going to be a competitive PvP team versus team combat, brightly colored characters, isometric gameplay, and it's something completely different from previous Bungie titles. Them using Unreal Engine 5 is interesting because they've been using the Tiger engine, I believe, for Destiny for quite some time, and even that I think was a playoff of the engine they basically used when they were making Halo back in the day, but nonetheless, we know they're doing Marathon, that's coming up. Destiny 2 seems to be kind of it feels like it's winding down. It's also been around for a while now, and then their new IP that's coming up. So yeah, Bungie is quite busy, and I'm curious how much this will differ from some of their other projects now, because it's certainly being described as something completely new for them. Oh, and for those of you who are looking forward to that Jurassic Park Classic Collection from Limited Run Games, but maybe we're disappointed the Genesis games weren't there, I have good news. Take a look at this. This is posted up over on Twitter from Limited Run Games saying Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park Rampage Edition, both originally released on the Genesis, are coming to the collection with all the bonus Carbon Engine features of the previously announced titles, like save states and in-game maps. They have some of the trailer here, and this is exciting stuff. It's the Genesis ones were different, and I remember being able to play as a raptor in it, kind of the 2D platformer style games from that era. Now this will be something you can order through Limited Run Games if you want it physically. Otherwise, they will be releasing it digitally November 22nd. So it just seems like an awesome value there for fans of those old school Jurassic Park games, especially with the Genesis titles being available. It's pretty awesome to see. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the FTC Activision Blizzard Microsoft case, as it did reveal quite a bit about the industry at large, whether it was some poor redactions giving us an idea as to the budgets, or even just inner workings and discussions, we'll say, between executives, but one part did have to do with what Nintendo has planned for their next generation device, as Bobby Kotick did talk about, I guess, just the power of the systems being comparable or on par with the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, which is about where I expect the raw power of the device to be, but then you play into things like DLSS and other tricks that NVIDIA will have up their sleeves with much newer architecture compared to those systems, and I think the results will probably impress quite a few people. But now we have some of those files that were heavily redacted being made public, and there are a few interesting things to note here. So we can see this posted up over on The Verge with, once again, a very heavily redacted email. But in here, they do mention it's given the closer alignment to Gen 8 platforms in terms of performance in our previous offerings on PS4, Xbox One. It is reasonable to assume we could make something compelling for the NG Switch as well. It will be helpful to secure early access to development hardware prototypes and prove that out nice and early. Now, this is an email from Robbie Forbes at Activision and Chris Schnackenberg at Activision to Bobby Kotick. All right, so they're basically out there making the rounds, getting the briefings and executive summary together to then send to Bobby Kotick so he can go over it fairly quickly before the call with Furukawa-san the next day. So this email was sent over to Bobby Kotick on December 14th, 2022, which I guess means that, yeah, they were going to be having a conference call with Furukawa on December 15th. So kind of puts a bit of a timeline to the whole thing. As we know, Bobby Kotick mentioned he had shown remorse in the courtroom over the fact that they did not support the Switch when, well, now looking back on it, they should have. It would have obviously been very beneficial for them just monetarily, because they would have made quite a bit of money off of a very successful platform at this point, especially with Call of Duty. And these files, I assume, were entered in, these emails, to show that, yeah, Activision Blizzard, even without Microsoft signing these deals with Nintendo and all these things, were at least interested in doing something for the NG Switch. Now, some are looking at that as maybe the code name for the next system, and it very well could be internally, like just mention it very quickly. Instead of saying Switch 2 or the next generation Switch or next gen hardware, I guess NG Switch or next generation Switch is an easy way to just quickly type that up and everyone will kind of get an idea as to what you're talking about before the official name is revealed. But yeah, as expected, Nintendo has been making the rounds for quite some time with big publishers and developers discussing their plans for the next generation system. And here's just an example of that, with a summary being drawn up before a conference call where I'm sure they talked about all kinds of plans, maybe the big idea or the big twist that they have for the next system that maybe Activision Blizzard can take advantage of with something like Call of Duty, or maybe they're just explaining some of the expected power for the system and what it would be comparable to, or plans for DLSS and so on. So again, interesting to see maybe the timetable revealed a bit better here, but I think after hearing about what they were doing at Gamescom and probably what they're going to do later this week at Tokyo Game Show, seems like we're getting pretty close to that Switch 2 or NG Switch reveal. I'm still thinking it's going to happen in the first quarter of 2024, but that's not too far off. Next up, let's talk about some other files that were made public from this entire case. It was a pretty large dump of just information all at once, and I actually have a link down below in the sources if you want to just go through as much as you can. There are times where you'll open one of these files and it's just a bunch of black boxes. The entire thing is redacted. But other cases, we're getting some information around future releases for Microsoft and Bethesda. For example, Elder Scrolls 6 has come up many times with Phil Spencer in interviews with something like Bloomberg, where he was asked outright, is that going to be a game that's only on the Xbox and PC? And he's kind of like navigating with PR speak and all this. Well, you can see this as part of those files that were put out there the other day. And we can see Elder Scrolls 6 that's right next to Redfall and Starfield, and they have a release date. They have to be confirmed or whatnot, but expected 2026 or later. That kind of falls in line with what he's mentioned. We're about 5 years out. Remember, the release dates shift quite a bit. Starfield was delayed pretty heavily, and I wouldn't be shocked if Elder Scrolls 6, just based on, I'm sure, the scope that that game's going to start out with, could potentially be pushed 2027 or even later. So take 2026 with a pinch of salt on that one. However, platforms available, Xbox and PC. No mention of to be determined or anything there. Oh, maybe PS5's in there with a question mark. None of that. It looks like it is indeed planned for Xbox and PC specifically. For some reason, this surprised people online yesterday. I have no idea why. I've mentioned here many times. It's just going to be an Xbox and PC Game Pass, a Game Pass game, essentially, right? Whatever platform Game Pass is on, Elder Scrolls 6 will follow. That's something that Phil Spencer has mentioned many times with a lot of these games in the future, and let's face it, 2026, 2027, potentially 2028, I mean, we're so far out from that Bethesda deal that I feel like most people have just been used to Bethesda games being specifically for Xbox and PC with Game Pass. The only thing I think people were holding on to was, okay, Redfall was a new intellectual property. Starfield was a new intellectual property. So that's kind of how Microsoft is treating these new IPs in general from Bethesda. There's going to be Xbox and PC. Elder Scrolls 6 is a continuation of a series that's already existed and has been on PlayStation. Well, Microsoft wants you to sign up for Game Pass. They want to push more and more people into their ecosystem. And as we're seeing with Starfield, which we'll talk about here in a second, it's working right now to have these big games. Who would have thought? Releasing big games that people can get excited for and takes over kind of the big marketing cycle seems to get people on board with your ecosystem, whether it's on PC or on Xbox. Microsoft, like I said, just wants you in one way or the other. You can be on Windows, going through Steam even and buying it, and they'll be fine with that too, as they've shown. So yeah, Elder Scrolls 6, whenever it does show up, 2027, 2028, it's probably just going to have the Xbox logo next to it, and that's it. Next up, let's talk about Starfield and some more sales data that we're getting, as we can see this posted up over on gamesindustry.biz. And these are the sales charts for Europe in general, and we can see at the top is Starfield. That's right, this is the week ending September 10th, so yeah, I guess Game Pass didn't really have effect on sales for this game. There are some people have wondered if a big title came out on Game Pass, would it still be able to sell and top sales charts? Well, here it is at the top, just above NBA 2K23. And I want to give a big shout out here to Titanfall 2, as it did go on sale, and there has been this renewed interest in the game. It has climbed all the way up to number 3. It beat out Grand Theft Auto 5. That to me, that's a major accomplishment in general, right? Red Dead Redemption 2, then Need for Speed Heat, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, Hogwarts Legacy, FIFA 23, and then Sid Meier's Civilization 6. But the really interesting chart for Starfield would be the European 2023 Week 1 sales so far. Like any game that's come out in 2023, where would it place for Week 1 sales? It's actually number 5. In fact, it's just behind Jedi Survivor, but ahead of Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy 16, Dead Island 2, NBA 2K23. I mean, really, the games it's trailing are big time releases. I just mentioned Jedi Survivor, but Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, that's not including digital sales, by the way, for Zelda, which is ridiculous. Diablo 4, and then Hogwarts Legacy. In fact, according to GamesIndustry.biz, this is the biggest Xbox launch this generation across Europe, and that places it above Forza Horizon 5. So yeah, Starfield certainly driving interest in Xbox and Game Pass, and sure, even on Microsoft Store, PC, and all of this, but basically just interest in general, despite it being on Game Pass, still selling really well. And it's something Microsoft has been trying to navigate, obviously, with these day one releases, as they also have these early access periods, which is really just the release date for it, but they sell access to that with the more expensive edition or this upgrade path for Game Pass members where it was like $35 more. So they're still technically extracting more money out of Game Pass subscribers if they want to get in early. Otherwise, you just wait for day one to come around for the game and you can download it there. But yeah, Starfield certainly doing numbers for Microsoft now. I'm still curious how it will continue to trend, especially leading up throughout the holidays, and if it's able to really push some of these Microsoft sales when it comes to the console side throughout the holiday period. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a slight update for Dragon Quest III HD 2D and then Dragon Quest 12, which are games that were announced, 2 years ago now, and people have just been asking to hear more about either of these games. I still think Dragon Quest III is sooner than Dragon Quest 12, but we at least had some sort of indication around this in Famitsu with an interview with Yuji Horii, who is obviously known as the creator for the Dragon Quest series, been there since the beginning, and in fact is working on Dragon Quest III, and we can see this posted up over on Gamatsu, where Famitsu asks, is your involvement in Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince similar to your involvement in the Dragon Quest III and HD 2D and Dragon Quest 12: The Flames of Fate, saying, it's roughly the same. Well, when it comes to Dragon Quest III, I already created that game once myself and know a lot about it. So I'll give advice along the lines of, if you want to change this, you should do it this way. Now, what is the development status of Dragon Quest III and Dragon Quest 12? Well, the answer, unfortunately, was not very straightforward necessarily, saying just Dragon Quest III and HD 2D is progressing quite steadily. As for Dragon Quest 12, there's still not much I can say. Okay, so as I mentioned, Dragon Quest III I think is coming sooner than 12. That should be probably obvious to most people. I wouldn't be shocked necessarily if Dragon Quest III made an appearance at Tokyo Game Show later this week, but Dragon Quest 12, I feel like we're years away from that, and that is a shame. I mean, when I say years, I mean 3 or 4 years. And again, it's a shame, obviously, because Dragon Quest XI is an awesome game. They've also released it multiple times and stuff, got the Game Pass deal, the whole thing, but the game is worth playing through. I think it's a great experience for fans of more of the traditional turn-based RPGs, which leads me to be slightly concerned around what they're going to do with Dragon Quest 12 for that fan base. I don't really mind if they want to take it more action-oriented, but they are going for a more mature tone. Dragon Quest III, on the other hand, I think looks awesome from what they've shown, and having Yuji Horii there helping out kind of makes me think that they're going to be more true to that original game, which, I mean, again, the gameplay and some of the visuals they showed, while in HD 2D, definitely plays into that nostalgia aspect. So I'm excited for Dragon Quest III, hoping it's at Tokyo Game Show, and I'm not expecting to see much of anything from Dragon Quest 12 for probably another 2 to 3 years. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're taking a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, if you're getting Spider-Man 2, which graphics mode will you be using? Look at this, 81% chose correctly. Okay, 4K 60 FPS in that performance mode. And then we have the 4K 40 FPS performance mode. It's interesting that more people would be using that than the 30 FPS fidelity mode, because I feel like most people who'd be using 40 have that 120 hertz VRR enabled display, and that's not exactly common still. But I understand there are people who also just want to do fidelity mode. I want to see this game as good as possible, right? The best visuals and all of this. I don't mind if it's 30, but yeah, 60 FPS for me all the way, especially with a fast-moving game like Spider-Man. And in fact, I feel like I'm still going to play it at 60 and the game will still look really good. That's just kind of where we are with visuals now. I mean, really, the law of diminishing returns kicking in, but the returns between 60 and 30, to me, that's very noticeable. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Capono, who says, John forgot to mention that Apple relies on Unity for the Vision Pro headset. Unity might be doing all this to get a buyout. So I had to double check this just to see what you were kind of referring to. But yes, Unity has partnered with Apple to do something called Polyspatial, I think that's how it's pronounced, and it allows VR games to be moved to the Vision Pro easier. So Unity, obviously, you can create VR games and all of that with it, but the idea of being able to basically transfer over your games to the Vision Pro easier is what Unity's tried to set itself up almost as a bridge to the Vision Pro. But then you start to realize, oh, well, you have to do an install fee for the games that we use to then bridge our stuff over. And that, again, kind of muddies up the water. And Apple's sort of stuck because they've already made all of this progress and this partnership with Unity. So you're mentioning a buyout as in Apple would buy Unity and they would just kind of become part of just the overall Apple machine. I guess it's possible. I just feel like Unity realized they have to make more money and they were like, well, let's just charge per install and that's how it'll all work out. We'll figure out the fine details later. Instead though, they're probably gonna end up losing more money just because no one really is excited to use Unity at this point, especially since it seems very, very murky in terms of the future of that engine, so why would you start a 5-year project with it now? And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Was Activision Blizzard and Nintendo's next generation device, or do we start calling it the NG Switch now? Do you think Activision will be there in a big way for the launch of Nintendo's next system, maybe in that first year, after that meeting with President Furukawa? And then also, what about Starfield and the effect it appears to be having on the sales charts? Do you think it's also going to work to spike Game Pass subscription numbers? And then Elder Scrolls 6, do you think it's actually going to make 2026, or is this something maybe coming out even years after that? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.